Facebook is not focused on protecting democracy and democratic systems. And I don't think that should be too surprising. We don't expect Union Carbide to repay the poor people of Bhopal. They could do it if they wanted to. They're not going to because they're a company. Their goal is to make money. And it, and so I don't think it's surprising to say the same for Facebook.
So, Sophie, tell us what it took for you to come out against Facebook and call out unethical practices you've seen at arguably one of the most powerful tech companies in the world.
People have to actually know the problem that's going on and understand it. You can't solve a problem unless you know it exists, and that's the core as to why I came forward. Imagine if the Bhopal chemical disaster had happened, but no one knew who was responsible, only Union Carbide did. In that case, I think it would be very important for someone within Union Carbide to come forward and tell the world what they know, and that's precisely what I'm doing now.
That's quite an ominous comparison you've drawn, Sophie. What can you tell us about what you've seen in Facebook and why it's particularly worrying for India's democracy?
Networks of fake accounts that were being used to manipulate people and manipulate the public discourse, often run by governments, authoritarian dictators, and politicians. An Indian would often refer to them as IT cells, and so that's the descriptor I'll be simplifying to. It was not part of my actual job, but I did it because I believed it was important, and it was close enough to my actual job that they got away with it. I caught the incumbent government red-handed, using IT cells to manipulate their own citizens on large scales. In India, there wasn't anything quite of that scope. However, when I found 5 IT cells in India across the political spectrum, Facebook agreed to take all of them down because these were blatant violations of their terms of service. Up until we discovered that one of these IT cells was linked to the personal account of the Honourable Member of Parliament from Kaushambi, Mr. Vinod Kumar Sonkar, who I understand to be the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Ethics, quite ironically. As soon as this discovery was made, I could not get a straight answer from anyone. They went completely silent. I kept raising the question. There was silence. Later, when I discovered a network of fake accounts influencing the Delhi elections to support the app, I would still bring this up. I would say, we're going to take down this pro-app IT cell to protect the Delhi elections. Can we also get a decision on the Kaushambi network? Otherwise, people will accuse of it as of being partial. And of course, this became a self-fulfilling prophecy because I'm the one accusing Facebook of being partial today, but we didn't know that.
Could you tell us a bit more about how these IT cells work? It's a commonly used term in Indian discourse. Why are they so dangerous?
The IT cell I mentioned before, that was influencing the Delhi elections in 2020 to support the app. The region had state assembly elections on, I believe, February 8th, 2020, in which the app defeated the BJP, for context. And so anyways, so this was 500 to 1,000 fake accounts. I'm giving a range because there was roughly 500 at every given point, but because we took down accounts and then they came back with new accounts, the total number of accounts was about 1,000, if that makes sense. And so what these accounts were doing was surprising to myself when I saw it, but it made sense as after I looked at it, in that they were trying to convince people who supported the BJP to vote app. And they were doing so by pretending to be BJP voters themselves, who were choosing to cross over to vote for Kejriwal and the app in the Delhi elections. And just backing up for a bit, I want to, in most cases for IT cells, we only know who they're supporting, who's benefiting, what they're trying to do. We don't know who's behind them. I'm trying to be cautious about my wording as a result. I say this was supporting the app. I don't say it was run by the app because we don't know that. It might have been run by someone who liked the app but wasn't associated with them. It might have been run by someone associated with a different party who wanted to hurt the BJP. It might have been something completely different. And in most cases, we don't know. And that's part of why I focused on the cases in which we do know.
So, why is it bad for democracy?
Fundamentally, democracy requires the ability of the common person to voice their opinion and to make their voices heard, and that cannot happen if their voices are being drowned out by a mass of fictitious voices run by shady political insiders. There is nothing wrong with supporting the app or the BJP or the Congress, but it is wrong to set up thousands of fake accounts supporting them in the same way that there's nothing wrong with voting for any party, but if you stuff ballot boxes with thousands of fake votes, that is not allowed, and most people I hope would agree it's bad. Because fundamentally, you are drowning out the voices of the other people. You are taking up space with your fictitious voices that would be used by the ADMI, by the average person. Frankly, in India, I think that the problem of IT cells is endemic, in the sense that every party feels that they need to engage in these practices, because if they do not, then their rivals will still do it, and they will lose an advantage. I don't consider the Honourable Member of Parliament from Kaushambi to be unusual. What was unusual about him was that he got caught, quite frankly. So I want to be clear that I'm only speaking about Facebook. So yes, there is a team that works on this issue. They are the analogy to India's intelligence bureau in that they're very prestigious, high status, highly trained, secretive, and they are also extremely overworked and spend too much and work too much with not enough support. I don't begrudge them the decisions they made. My fundamental disagreements have always been with Facebook leadership, with Ajit Mohan and the others who made it so that they had to make those difficult decisions. They've prohibited people from discussing matters not directly related to their workplace, and they've made most groups and conversations closed by default. It's a change that any Indian who's lived through the emergency can likely recognize, but it's not one I would consider to be positive.
How is Facebook getting away with such repeated malpractices?
I mean, as you said, Facebook is not focused on protecting democracy and democratic systems. And I don't think that should be too surprising. We don't expect Union Carbide to repay the poor people of Bhopal. They could do it if they wanted to. They're not going to, because they're a company. Their goal is to make money. And so I don't think it's surprising to say the same for Facebook. Even though people are critical of them today, they're still surprised to act like Facebook is a company whose goal is to make money. And I've been in interviews where they ask me questions like, if Facebook can't fix itself, can anyone? No one asks, if Union Carbide can't stop chemical disasters, can anyone? Or etc. But Facebook still has that good PR in which people have the expectation that they're trying to be better, because that's what they say. But usually this is the point in which the government steps in. For instance, the Indian government forced Union Carbide to pay a fine. I think it was something like $500 million. The Indian government taxes cigarettes. They require cigarette companies to put on the packaging that this product will give you cancer. I'm not suggesting that we go back to the times of the license Raj and the Hindu rate of growth, but I think it's reasonable to say that social media is also a case in which the government should step in.
Speaking of the Indian government, what is your ideal case if, and this is a big if, you ended up deposing in front of a parliamentary standing committee?
I mean, ultimately, I see my role as more advising than providing a solution. I have my own ideas, but it would be deeply presumptuous for me to pretend to speak for the Indian people. I'm not even Indian myself. I see my role as providing information that others can use to solve the problem, and I can give advice, but it should stay at that advice. It should not be in my power to tell India what to do. I mean, I'm not Indira Gandhi. They refused to take down the IT cells connected to Vinod Sankar and did not give an explanation. In contrast, when I caught IT cells connected to 3 sitting Congress MLAs, Facebook took them. Shivnath Sokro personally approved their takedown in 8 hours.
That's very interesting. Thanks for that, Sophie. What then can we expect the Indian government to do in the face of Facebook's seemingly increasing control over online narratives?
They could ban Facebook permanently. They could arrest Facebook employees, such as they threatened to do last year over the Farm Bill kerfuffle. But it also has a bad side effect, in the sense that because Facebook is partial in this regard, it gives the government an advantage with regard to the running of IT cells. if no one had an advantage, then people could come to an arms control treaty. They could illegalize it because everyone would be spending money and no one would be given any net advantage. But instead, the government has an advantage, and it's very hard to ask anyone to give up an advantage that they possess. So the only people who have the incentive to change Facebook's practices in India are the ones who have no power to do so. Even if a new government is elected in India, there's no guarantee that they will change these practices at all, because as soon as they become elected, Facebook will suddenly become partial in their favor. And so this is a very difficult proposition. I mean, here are some examples of how this could change, none of which are entirely likely, unfortunately. They already have had to some extent, which, for instance, the farmers' protests, in which the government threatened Facebook with the arrest of employees in order to obtain data on certain people alleging farmers' genocide incorrectly. I mean, it's very difficult to get people united in unison about something like this, but I mean, united, there's very little that can stop the Indian people, quite honestly. Another one is if the global community decides to regulate Facebook, which as an afterthought forces Facebook to clean up its act in India. But this again does not seem especially likely, as most countries seem to be going at it alone, quite frankly. And furthermore, if this were to happen, it would likely raise accusations of colonialism because of the optics of change being imposed upon India from without over the objections of the government.